Hello, aligned authors. I'm Valerie Isan, and this is episode 212 of the podcast, and it is May 28th, 2026, as I record this. The main topic today is truth telling in fiction and in memoir, and I'm talking with guest Grace Sammon. But our conversation expanded into this wonderful, wild, beautiful, super interesting conversation that spanned the difference between telling your truth and owning your truth, using a ghostwriter as a literary device, why fiction holds what memoir sometimes can't, who owns the truth and what silence costs us, invisibility, relevance, visibility. It was a really interesting conversation. So I'm happy to bring that to you in just a moment. Thank you to my existing patrons for believing in my work here on the podcast and offline as well. If you are a patron in either tier, you get all my content always, no matter what it is. You can support me and my dreams and my writing and my aligned author life for $11.11. And I would be so, so grateful, truly, heart to heart, gratitude for all your gifts. But if you want coaching too, with 2 live calls every month, you can back me at $55.55. You will never find coaching as inexpensive as this. So if you've ever wanted continued support for your writing or accountability for your projects, this is the way to do it. You can become a patron of the arts and of me at patreon.com/Valerie Isan, IHSAN. Updates. I am designing my next writing retreat in Costa Rica, you guys. I'm super excited about this. I wasn't able to run a retreat last year because we had this big epic move. So I'm really looking forward to designing the next retreat. And this is my first international retreat, even though I live here. So technically it's not international for me, but I know most of my listeners are in the US. So there's a lot more moving parts to doing an international retreat than I first imagined. So I'm taking this 4-month course that's going to get me through all the legalities and best practices. And if you're interested in these updates as I get through them on the retreat, you can go to my website to the retreat page. So valerieisan.com/retreat. And at the bottom of that page, there is a place to join the waiting list. And that will get you all of the email marketing, all the updates about the retreat itself. So that's super exciting. I can't wait to get through that. I think I'll probably have the sales page up next month. So look for that. There was a request to bring back a regular patron gathering for all of my members, paid and unpaid. And so I think what I'm going to do is a mini writing retreat. We'll get all cozy. We'll light a candle. I'll draw an oracle card to set the intention for the session. We'll do a little check-in where you talk about one struggle you're having, one win you have, and then, what you're working on that night. And we'll do a guided meditation, and then we're just going to write words. And at the end, if that's your thing, you can share your word count. Some people are really into that. Some people don't like word count goals. So anyway, please send me a DM or comment on this wherever you're listening to it and let me know if that's something that you're interested in. It's not just a shared writing space. I think, since COVID, we've all been doing that, but it's just, it's a retreat from your regular life. You're going to tune in, you're going to have a little meditation experience, and you're going to forget all about the dogs and the dishes and the floors and your day job and just be in this safe, sacred space to connect and to write. So I really would like to create that space for you. So again, patreon.com/Valerie Song. Costa Rica update. We've been talking with the architect and just sort of nailing down all the must-haves. And every day I keep thinking, oh yeah, I got to tell him I want this. Oh yeah, I got to tell him I want this. So we have a WhatsApp like group chat going. So I keep sending him things. And we do have to drive north like 2 or 3 hours to meet a lawyer to sign a document. We're having our car nationalized. I don't know if I told you this last time, um, but we've got a rental vehicle right now because the car it has to go through customs and pay the import fees and do an inspection and get the Costa Rican plates and all that stuff. So we're really excited to do that and get that done so we can be a more legal and set member of the community. But we didn't realize that it was going to take like up to 2 months to do. Um, so that really threw us for a loop. So we had to rent a car. So we've rented a car for a month and hope that it'll be done in the month. Otherwise, we'll just have to keep adding on time for the rental car. But at any rate, we drove up to San Jose, which is like 6 hours away, and dropped it off, rented the car, and we just assumed we'd hear from them when it was done. We'd go back and pay them and pick it up. And there's a little bit more to it than that. So we have to go back and they're going to meet us halfway. A lawyer's going to meet us halfway so we can sign these. I think they're affidavits or something. I don't know. There's just papers we have to sign for some government office. And so that has to be done. Probably that'll be next week. Anyway, I am still reading The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur because I am also reading, you know me, Mosswood Apothecary by J.P. Rindfleisch and The Reliable Narrator by Grace Sammon. Really is super interesting book. So, and then the back burner books, that are still there. I've started them, but they're like day books or like little essays, small things that you can pick up and read little bits here and there. And that's The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. All right, let's get into the main topic. Grace Sammon is a dynamic force in the literary world, an award-winning author, radio host, entrepreneur, and educator. Recognized in Who's Who in Education and Who's Who in Literature, she is the recipient of the 2025 Indies United Publishing Houses Award for Inspirational Women in Literature, Media, and Journalism. A master of reinvention, Grace transformed her career with her fourth book and debut novel, The Eves, which garnered strong critical acclaim. In addition to her newest novel, The Reliable Narrator, she has authored 7 books, including the 3-book Launchpad series, which guides writers through the journey of writing, publishing, and marketing their books. She's served as a guardian ad litem for neglected and abused children and as a hospice worker. She is currently a committee member for the Safe Children's Coalition. Grace's hallmark is helping others leave their mark on the world because when our stories are told, everything changes. Her current works in progress include 2 new radio shows and a novel. Grace lives in Florida's West Coast with her husband and a small herd of imaginary llamas because every storyteller needs a touch of magic.
And
Welcome to the podcast, Grace. I'm so happy to meet you virtually like this.
Lori, it is a pleasure to meet you and to be virtually back in Costa Rica.
Yes. You said you were there one time?
Mm-hmm.
One
That's
time.
great.
Was it for a cruise, you said?
We did. We did the national parks. It was absolutely beautiful.
Where did you fly into?
I want to say San Juan?
San Jose.
San Jose. There you
San
go.
Jose. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I must tell you that as a novelist, memoirist, and an author looking into offering ghostwriting services, I was super intrigued by your many talking points in your media kit. I hope that we get to talk about all of my favorites. But let's start with why fiction holds what memoir sometimes can't. That is a really juicy statement, and I want to know what you mean by that.
I think there's a place for memoir and there's a place for fiction. And I think that memoir is huge right now. And whether you're journaling or whether you're writing a memoir for publication, I think telling our stories to ourselves first and foremost, and then being able to share our stories with others is very valuable. You mentioned my first book, The Eves, and the tagline for that book is, when our stories are told, everything changes. And I really believe that we each have a story. And I think that when we own that story and tell that story and share that story, everything changes. I know that was very true in my own life. In terms of your specific question, though, about memoir and fiction, I think there are sometimes that we as readers can hear a story better if it's fiction. And I think
Mm.
there's times where we as writers can tell our story. If it isn't maybe as in your face as memoir can sometimes be. Plus, if you're writing fictionalized memoir, you can play around a lot. You don't have to, if it's memoir, it should be factual, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's fictionalized memoir, you can kind of play with the story.
What is the difference between fictionalized memoir and a novel? I mean, that is, there is,
Well, I
it's
think
just
when you,
fiction then. If it's a fictionalized memoir, it's fiction.
well, I think though there are so many elements of the author's own story in it. And I'm sure, you get this asked all the time, how much of that in your novel is, you. So for example, in my first novel, The Eves, very little of that was my own story. In The Reliable Narrator, a lot more of it is my story. So even though it's not my story, I was able to draw very much from my personal experience in a way that I didn't in my other novel. So yes, it's definitely fiction, but there's enough elements of the truth in there.
I remember reading the book Shantaram by
Hmm.
David Gregory Roberts, something like that. There was three names. And it's about a man who escapes prison and goes to Mumbai and starts a medical practice in the slums
Wow.
and lots of other stuff too. It's a real big book. And the author's bio on the back says pretty much that too. So all the way through the book, I'm thinking, well, like, what part of this is memoir and what part of this is not?
Right.
Which I found distracting as a reader because I want to know, like, I love reading memoir as a genre. And when I read memoir, I know it's all factual. This is actually what happened.
Hmm.
But when I read a novel where those lines blur, I get kind of well, distracted is a good word. I'm pulled out of the story a little bit because I'm wondering, is this real? Is this fictional?
I think that you don't want that as an author, right? You don't want somebody pulled out of the story.
Right.
So I never say this is fictionalized memoir, but my two characters in the book, it's a book within a book. They very much, for many reasons, choose fictionalized memoir. Some of it is to protect other people's identities. Some of it is they feel the story is more compelling. If it's not, hi, it's me, it's me. So, but I think that that's a very important thing because you do so much book coaching yourself. I think it's really important for authors to know you never want your reader pulled out of the story.
Yeah. Was going to say something and I forgot it while I was listening to you. So hopefully I'll remember that coming back
Circle
around.
back.
um, oh, I know what it was because when I wrote my first book, it was a memoir and I started out writing it as a memoir, but I kept getting stuck because, it was my first book. So I had this image of what I thought it was supposed to be like, and it wasn't coming out that way. So I kept thinking I was doing it wrong.
Hmm.
And so then I decided to fictionalize it. And then it was easier to write because it was about somebody else and not me. But, 13,000 words in, I was like, but wait, the whole reason I wanted to write this was so that I could connect with other people with the same, circumstance
Hmm.
as the first memoir. So I ended
Well,
up going back and writing it as the memoir because that was,
but
yeah.
that gets to such an important point. When I do book coaching, the first thing I say to any of my clients is, why are you writing this book?
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have that answer, we spend a lot of time on that. So you knew in the writing of your book, it was to connect with other people who had a similar situation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could still do that in a fictionalized way, but you're probably going to do it much more powerfully if it's
Yeah.
memoir.
Yeah.
So, regardless of what people are writing, I think the why you're writing the book is
Mm-hmm.
really, really important.
I'm a sucker for books that are about authors. And the last novel that had that hook was also about a ghostwriter. It's funny enough. So, what can you say about using the ghostwriter as a literary device?
Been wanting to write about a ghostwriter for a long time. I have a friend of mine who's a New York Times best-selling author, and she makes the bulk of her money as a ghostwriter.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that absolutely fascinating. I think I am not a New York Times bestseller. And I think, oh, you're a New York Times bestseller. You're on Easy Street. Every single thing you're going to write from here on in is going to be a New York Times bestseller. You're not going to need to do any of the things that those of us who are not in that tier have to do to get our books into the hands of readers. So I was very, very fascinated by that as just a need. And then I really wanted to write about somebody who could only ghostwrite because she felt that she didn't have a story to tell. So in the case of the reliable narrator, Darby Small is very much hiding behind everybody else's story because she doesn't think she has a story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to give Darby a flaw, and I love writing about flawed characters. And I mean, we're all flawed. We're
Right?
all flawed. But I love giving somebody a flaw that we can kind of play around with. So it's not until Darby's absolutely larger than life, flamboyant best friend texts her and says, "We have to write our story because we're running out of time because I'm dying."
Mm.
And that gave us lots and lots to play with. But the ghostwriter theme was very interesting to explore. What was it like to publish books and your name is never on the spine? What is it like to watch an author do a book talk when you know they haven't written one word of the book? So I got to play around with a little bit of jealousy types of things that authors sometimes feel. And I put a counterbalance in there that Darby has a brother who is wildly famous. And I did that a little bit because my own brother, I have 8 books out. I'm working on my ninth. My brother has 45 books.
Wow.
So I did that as a little homage to my brother. Okay, I see your books, name after name after name on the spine. Here's my 8.
Which is miraculous, though, like don't cut yourself short for publishing 8 books. That's awesome.
Thank you. I agree, but there's still that 45 that's overtaken.
Oh, so as a literary device, how did you use you said it was a story within a story. So how did you use the character as a ghostwriter as a device to write this novel?
Well, she has several characters. She has several clients of her own.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to see through Darby's writing of these other stories, bits and pieces more and more of her own story. And there's one of the scenes that I love in the book is she is sitting on the floor of her office and she realizes that her fingerprints are on every single page of
Mm,
everything she's ever ghosted for anybody else. So I used it for her to come into her own as she began to understand the power of her own words and that she was leaving breadcrumbs all over everybody else's work, whether she realized it or not. And there's another fun literary device that I use, and came as a total surprise to me. Um, she uses very much Virginia and Leonard Woolf as her muses.
hmm.
And I just
I
wanted
caught that. I love that she was talking to Virginia Woolf.
Oh, it's so much fun, isn't it, Valerie?
Yeah.
I love that you're reading the book, so thank you. what I liked there was all I wanted originally was for Darby to be grounded at her desk, have a picture of Leonard and Virginia Woolf on her desk, have a first edition copy of A Room of One's Own on the desk. And that was going to ground her. It was her way of saying, this is my space, this is mine. But then, and people who write know this, Virginia and Leonard Woolf started talking in my head. And they were very funny and they were very droll and they were very matter of fact and they were very hard on Darby. But even though Virginia has such a sad, in my opinion, trajectory of her own life, they bring humor at just the right points throughout the book, I think.
That's cool. I can't wait to get to more of those parts.
Thank you.
So, in your in your media kit,
Mhm.
I really like the way you've got it set aside. This is just like in the weeds here. This isn't really, this is for me and you, maybe other podcast hosts, but I really like that you've got the topics separated by who they're for, the writers and publishers, or talking about aging or other literary stuff or women. And I found that a lot of the topics that you speak on for women are also the same topics that writers can relate to as well. For instance, one that I liked was who owns the truth and what does silence cost us as women, but also as authors. Can you talk more about that? Because when a
Yeah.
ghostwriter is, well, I'll let you answer it, and then I'll talk about what I think.
Good. First of all, I have to thank Joelle, who's my publicist at Go Shift Key. She is just amazing. She works incredibly hard. Joelle Pileski, Go Shift Key. But she also forced me by saying, we need more. The media kit needs to be stronger. I want you to have this. I want to be able to put us out to a whole array of different kinds of podcasters,
Hmm.
interviews, etc. So together we created that. And it was really interesting to create all these different topics that I could talk on and then be able to see individuals see where they might fit, whether they were talking about aging or talking about women or talking about bookish things. And there is a lot of overlap.
Hmm.
So I think that
Which I think is how we live our values and work like they're all intertwined. If you are if you're an aligned author, then you are working your values and you're writing your values and you're living your values, and I think that's really great, and your media kit speaks to that.
one of the things, sometimes people think, you wrote a book, so you're very, very smart just because you wrote a book. I'm sure you've had that experience. I don't think that's necessarily true. All I do is rearrange 26 letters all day on the page. But I think I was very slow to understanding one of the things you picked up on, and that is the importance of truth. For me, it's very important to be authentic. You can pretty much ask me anything, and I'm not going to wear my heart on my sleeve, but I'm going to be very authentic with you. And it's not because you and I are on the little scope of this Zoom screen. It's because I think living authentically makes for a much healthier life. But it took
Hmm.
me a long time to get to this nugget of truth. So in my first book, The Eves, Jessica has lost her way. She has lost everything about who she thought she was. And she's given up on everything except for her lies and her vodka. And as
Hmm.
part of that, her coming to know her truth, that's the one with the tagline of when our stories are told, everything changes. She meets this group of older women who are diverse and they're colorful women and women of color. And as she takes their oral histories, she learns more and more about her truth as she documents their truths. In The Reliable
Hmm.
Narrator, Darby has been hiding behind the secret of her childhood abuse for 50 years. Phoebe also has a secret. And what I began to uncover there was that there is an intergenerational price to silence. There's a
Hmm.
huge challenge between Darby and her mom. There's a big challenge between Phoebe and her daughter. And it was in the writing of that I began to really understand for myself what it means to own your truth, tell your truth, who has the right to share a story, who doesn't. Sometimes people will say, "Hey, I told you that in confidence. That wasn't your story to tell." So I think that was a factor of it. But this idea of truth telling apparently is very important to me because my next novel, which hopefully will be out early next year, is called Honestly David. And it's the story of a woman who's married to a pathological liar. So
So yeah.
the tagline there is because love changes everything except the truth. So I
What's
think
the
I have a truth issue.
Yeah. It's a theme. I hear that it's a theme, which is
Uh,
super interesting, I think, to see a person's work over time and the themes that they go back to over and over again.
Especially if the author herself didn't realize that that was her theme.
When did you realize it?
After I finished Reliable Narrator, and I started talking to people about it, and they saw things from the eaves into this book. And then I just sat down, started Honestly David, and I went, "Oh, seriously?
Here it is again.
There it is again."
Definitely a value then of yours.
Yes.
So what's the difference between telling your truth and owning it then?
Oh, I think that's a great question. So I'll just jump into being authentic. I have shared with people over the years that I experienced, and I use the word experienced childhood abuse.
Hmm.
I've said that very comfortably to people. But once I wrote The Reliable Narrator, where Darby has to come to terms with not only the abuse, but the aftermath of the abuse, and I got started to be invited on different types of podcasts, I realized that unless I actually owned that truth, I was being just like Darby and hiding behind somebody else's story. I really felt that to own my truth was to be more authentic, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's what I mean, that it's one thing just to tell people that, but I think it's another thing to also be more introspective. What is the effect of this on me? And we all have trauma. We all have trauma. It could just be a horrible fight at work one day. That's trauma. So I think it also speaks to wanting to live an introspective life. I'm not talking about, totally navel gazing and putting blinders on, but I think it does say, what is the effect things, events, people, places have on me? But I also then think it calls us to realize the effect we have on others.
So how does that, can you hide behind your own story? You said that you
Oh, I think I totally
told
could have.
the you told the story of the childhood trauma, but you didn't own it. And that was because you didn't reflect on it, or
Think that the difference for me now as an author is I had no intention when I wrote Reliable Narrator to ever, ever, ever speak of my own experience. I just, I didn't think it was relevant to the story. And as an author, I don't want to be the poster child for abuse. I want the
right?
story to fully stand on its own, whether I wrote it with my experience, or another author wrote it from no experience, but just told the story really well. I don't want readers to get caught up in the, "Oh my gosh, Grace had this experience." I want readers to walk into that novel and to be fully present.
Mm-hmm.
I also write all of my books very introspectively. So the primary character, you are always in her head throughout
Mm-hmm.
the book, and there's so much interiority there. So you'll notice in my writing that what I do is there's great deal of detail about everybody else. You know what color Phoebe's hair is. You know, you can pick up the coffee cup. You can smell the pinon wood burning. You'll never hear me describe what any of my main character, whether it's Jessica or Darby. You have no idea what she looks like, except Darby is, 5'8". That's the only thing you'll know, because I want readers to be in Darby's head.
Hmm.
So the coming to own the story was when interviewers would say, "So, any of this story yours?" And I'd go, "Oh, I guess I have to own that because if my thing is apparently about truth,
Hmm.
it then becomes very inauthentic not also to talk about those pieces."
I read a book called Body Work by Melissa Febos,
Hmm.
on the power of personal narrative. And she was talking about making sure that when you wrote your story that you weren't writing down the story that you had been telling yourself all these years, but instead writing down like the truth. I think this is speaks to what you just said perfectly, because I think that's how you can hide behind your story. You tell the story, it becomes rote, and you just glance
Exactly.
over it. It's the summary. and and then but on the page you can't just write down that story you've been telling yourself or other people. It has to come alive. You have to own that truth and live in it and be more raw.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
there's also the idea that we don't as author, well, some genres do. In my genre of literary fiction, I did not want to affront anybody. So I was very careful with how I write about some really tough subjects. We've already touched on abuse. There's some domestic violence. Phoebe is fatally ill. There's some right to die versus, dying a more traditional course.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to be able to communicate with readers, and there's family stuff everywhere. So I wanted to be able to challenge readers, but not in a way that would make them back away. So there's a place for that in fiction as well,
Mm-hmm.
um, but not for me in this book.
Yeah, I think that as authors, part of our, I don't want to say part of our job, but it is a truth that we can affect change in readers. And
Absolutely.
and that is kind of the goal, really. I mean, I don't want to say manipulating emotions, but kind of that's what we do.
But when
It
I
sounds
hear from
evil,
a
but
no, when I hear from a reader that I cried,
hmm.
I had a man email me the other day, and there's a line in the book where Darby's mother says to Darby, "Phoebe's asked you to help her die. It will be you who walks her into the arms of death."
Mm,
And this man emailed me and said, "I had to stop because I was crying." And I was like,
mm.
yes, yes.
Yay!
So yes, a little manipulation is in there. That makes me very happy when my readers cry.
Oh man. When you wrote the reliable narrator, how did how did Darby appear to you? I mean, not physically, like how did she show up in your writing psyche?
It wasn't, I had mentioned earlier that I really wanted to do something about a ghostwriter. And I'd been
Right.
playing around with it for a while. And I kept on saying, I just can't write about somebody who's in the publishing industry who's a ghostwriter. There's got to be a hook. And it
Mm-hmm.
took me a long time. The why question is so important. Why are you writing the book? The other one is, why would Darby be hiding? Why would Darby be hiding? She's highly successful. She's sought after New York City ghostwriter, but she's hiding. It's not just that she's chosen to be a ghostwriter as a career. She has chosen hiding. And I just played around with different scenarios and then I just went, I know why she's
Oh,
hiding.
yeah.
I know why she's hiding now. And I had it so that her mother made her be silent at the age of 12 and she just felt she had nothing to say. And
Mm,
then I was off and running.
that's awesome. I love to hear behind the scenes, like how stories come together. I think
Me
that's really
too.
fun. And then you talked a little bit about the Eves. How did that protagonist come to you?
That was a little bit easier. And again, being authentic. I was traveling 200 days a year. I was an educational
Mm,
consultant.
hmm
I worked in 32 states. That's recipe for exhaustion right then
mm,
and there. I was also at a point in my life where my mom had deceased, my dad was elderly, and my children were full grown. I wasn't
hmm
married. I was going to retire, and I went, who the heck am I?
mm,
I am not a mom. I am not a daughter. I am not going to be this educational consultant. What happens when you lose all of your roles? And
mm,
I think that's a really important question women particularly ask. Men certainly ask it, but I think women particularly ask that question. So I went, okay, let me make the most messed up version of myself I can. And Jessica is all that and a bag of chips. She was me, definitely as messed up as I could have been, rudderless. And how do you find your way? How do we reinvent ourselves? I do talks now on the joy of reinvention, and it is joyful now, but most of the time there's actually a line in the reliable narrator where Darby talks about how the second time we reinvent ourselves we tend to be very resentful. Maybe we've gotten fired, maybe we've gotten a divorce, we had no our life was going along just fine, and then zap, we have to reinvent ourselves. And then the third time, she says, and if we're lucky, the third time we get to do it with wild abandon.
mm.
And I'm working on the wild abandon
The
right now.
wild abandoned part,
I'm
yeah.
working on wild abandon.
Can you talk more about the invisibility of women in literature? Or maybe this is more a Darby Small question. She was invisible for the reasons we talked about, but I think that certainly it's all over the internet too that women sometimes become invisible as we age and lose that not relevancy but kind of, like our roles are stripped for various reasons and then we
Yep.
do have to figure out who we are again. But how do you know when you've become invisible and what do you do about it when that happens?
You see it so often in so many different ways, particularly, I think, as we lose the different roles, for sure. And sometimes I think choosing invisibility is fine. I don't think anybody has to go out there and shout and own a truth publicly that they're uncomfortable with. So I want to be very, very clear about that. But the idea of becoming invisible, I think it happens in small ways, like losing those roles. You don't have as
Mm-hmm.
much to talk about. You know,
Mm.
you just
Ooh.
don't, if you, and I see it, I've got fabulous children and grandchildren, but there are times where, and I would like to say that I'm fairly techno fluent, I'm fairly out there, but there are times where they're talking about things that I just don't have my finger on the pulse of. And I retreat and I watch that world go on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
I'm not central to that. And I remember my grandmother having very much the same experience as she began to lose her hearing. She said, I'm sitting
Mm.
here and I'm looking at conversations, but I'm not engaged in them. And I think there is a difference too with women. I was just at a very, very lovely I hate even to say retirement community because people will have images of what that means. This is this amazing place where a whole bunch of people who tend to be older live. And they were talking about volunteers and being involved. And they were talking about needing more men because the committee will have more clout if there are more men on it.
Mm. Mm.
And I found that a fascinating stance in 2026 that the committee would still have more clout if they got men. So I think we're aware I'm certainly aware when I become invisible. It could even be at happy hour when I go out with my friends when I realize I haven't said anything for 10 minutes and nobody's asked me
Mm.
anything. So I think a lot of it for me means being a good listener, being a good conversationalist, trying to connect with others where they're at. As a podcast host myself and with you, you know that asking people questions, you always, get more out of them. So I think that to not become invisible, we have to stay relevant. And I think also we have to find meaning and purpose. And that for women in my age group, I think is very, very much of a constant theme. How do we find meaning and purpose? We're not babysitting kids. We're not on the PTA. We're not still active in some people's careers. So finding meaning and purpose. And for me, a lot of that is through volunteering as well as my writing.
You talked about relevance and meaning and purpose. So when we are thinking about our books and getting them out into the world and being visible, whether it's online in the socials or on podcast episodes or just showing up in our work, that in it of itself can be meaningful and have purpose. But how do we get our books, out there in the world and so that people see them? How do we be visible with our books so that people will buy them? Does it have anything to do with that relevance and meaning and purpose?
So I also think it has to do with building community.
Okay.
And I think the socials can do that, even though I have a real love-hate relationship with the socials.
Lots
Building,
do.
yes, building community is so important. I particularly love book clubs. I'll Zoom anywhere in the world for a book club. But, the secret to marketing, you can play with all the algorithms. In my intro, you read that, I came up with a series of books called Launchpad, the Countdown to Writing, Publishing, and Marketing Your Book. I wish any of us had the magic, bullet for that. We've seen books like the number one book right now, I think everybody I know is reading it, is Theo of Golden. And Theo of Golden was self-published until some magic thing happened and a publisher picked him up, and now it's the number one New York Times bestseller. So I wish all of us as authors had that magic wand to be able to do that. But it's interesting, you just jogged something in my mind about the importance of visibility and how do we do it. I mentioned relevance. One of the things I do in the eaves, because Jessica is so broken and she just doesn't know where to start putting her life back together. So she writes down these life lessons, and they're really simple things like be kinder than you need to be.
Mm.
First, do no harm. Listen well. There's a series of about 20 life lessons that Jessica documents from the other readers. And as my beta reader, by the other women, the other characters. And as my beta readers were giving me feedback, they were like, oh, I love that she's writing these things down. So I created in the back of the eaves and also for download on my website a single sheet where you can write down Jessica's life lessons. And book clubs use them. I give them out as little freebies. But I really liked that idea. One, as a writing and marketing tool from when I was writing narrator, but I remembered how much the beta readers liked that. And frequently, when I either go to book clubs or go to podcasts, I created something similar for Darby. And she and Phoebe, as they're writing their book, write a series of what they call lessons in visibility.
Yeah, I read that.
And, the first one they write down is speak even when your voice shakes.
Mm.
Invisibility and visibility each have their own time and place and their own risk and price. And I think there's 20 of them. And these are little snippets that came to me as I was writing, and Darby and Phoebe were talking. And I went, we can do that in this book. And you can download those 20 lessons in visibility on my website.
Which will help you be a more visible author.
More visible person.
Yeah. I guess that's where it starts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it has been so charming to meet with you and talk with you. And I really, really loved all the things that we talked about. It was really interesting.
Really enjoyed being with you, Valerie. Please stay in touch as you read the book. If you ever want me back, you're a joy to speak with as well. It'd be
Oh,
great
thank
to
you.
have you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Bye bye.